Charles Manson went to court on a stolen property charge. He has not been named in the murders of actress Sharon Tate and at least 7 other persons, but police say he's the leader of a hippie group whose members committed the crimes. Several, held on minor charges, are in custody of Inyo County Sheriff Merrill Curtis.
One Sunday, reporters were told, as we get it, how they got the information, we don't know. They say travel.
Las Vegas, 2017, 60 killed, more than 850 injured. Polk, Orlando, Florida, 49 killed, 53 injured. Virginia Tech, 2007, 32 killed, 17 injured. Sandy Hook Elementary, 26 killed, unknown number wounded. First Baptist Church, Sutherland Springs, Texas, November 17, 2017, 26 killed, 20 injured. In 1991, in Killeen, Texas, 23 killed. In 2019, Walmart, El Paso, Texas, 23 killed, 26 injured. In Robb Elementary School, the infamous Uvalde, Texas, May 24, 2022, 21 killed. Lewiston, Maine, October 23rd, 18 killed. Parkland, Florida, 17 killed. San Bernardino, California, December 15, 2015, 14 killed. Edmond Post Office, 1986, 14 killed. Fort Hood, 2009, 13 killed. Columbine High School, 1999, 13 killed. Birmingham, New York, April 2009, 13 killed. The list goes on and on and on. We have the places, we have the number dead, we have the number wounded, we have the environment, the context, the situation. What is hard to find are the names of the shooters. When you go online and you begin to search names of mass shooters, it will give you the location, it will give you the event, it will give you a lot of information, but you are hard pressed to find the names and even harder pressed in your mind to remember the names of some of the most infamous and bloody and violent serial killers that has ever been. We call them mass shooters, but they used to be called serial killers. Of course, at the tip of the tongue are such serial killers as Ted Bundy, son of Sam, Jeffrey Dahmer. But it seems to be that these serial killers / mass shooters, well, the event is at the tip of our tongue, but they themselves are lost in the history and the dustbin of antiquity. What is going on and what is happening? And what is interesting is there seems to be a profound occult connectivity between so many different things. The more we go with the soul trap, the more we find that there is an underlying spiritual, almost like tentacles of an octopus, or rather veins throughout the body that connect and circulate this occult spirit of violence, of sexual perversion, of insanity throughout our entire world. We are living, in a sense, in a matrix, in a connective matrix. And one of the things that's fascinating is when you study, you begin to see these odd coincidences. But after a while, you have to start asking yourself, are they really coincidences? Or are they connectivity? A spiritual and occult connectivity. In a book that we often reference here, and I think that every researcher should have, there is a book by Peter Levenda called Sinister Forces. This is a very interesting book, and I want to read you just a little bit from the foreword that is written here. I'm going to pause there. Let me read you just a couple clips here from the introduction as we set the tone for what we're going to be talking about today. One writer in the book here, the writer states, perhaps with reference to what seems to be a Fortean element, the pattern of coincidence that unfolds these highly strange events, adding a distinct woohoo factor to Levenda's study. Whether it is Lee Harvey Oswald's habit of hanging out at a certain cafe in Japan, which we will talk about later on, being a part of a code name of a CIA operation, or the famous chain of coincidences surrounding the Kennedy and Lincoln assassinations. You say, what's so coincidental about them? Well, believe it or not, Lincoln's secretary named Kennedy and Kennedy's secretary named Lincoln each warned the president not to make their fatal journey. It seems almost as if an early warning system is embedded in the passages of time itself, or in what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. And that system would seem to be sending a stream of warning signals, enciphered, and synchronicities. Now, I would argue that, unlike Carl Jung, there is not a collective unconsciousness, but I would argue that there is a collective consciousness, but it is an extra-human consciousness. What I would argue is that there is a collective, unseen, spiritual, extra-human consciousness that is working behind the scenes, beneath the surface, and in the shadows. And that the reason that we see these synchronicities, these things pop up from time to time, which seem to lend themselves to a coincidence, is that there is not a coincidence, but a collective urgency, a collective movement of powers that be that reach beyond the veil, through the veil, and affect our human lives. Lavanda writes a very interesting short paragraph here in his introduction, talking about the connection of synchronicities and politics. He says, to what degree does mysticism, including occultism, religious organizations, and secret societies, influence politics? Can it be demonstrated that there is no real separation of church and state despite most of Americans' belief? Can we show that the world's political leaders are motivated by, at times, bizarre and outrageous religious or spiritual convictions, thus threatening, at the least, the very nature of the American way of life, and at the most, American lives in general? Is politics a science? Is it an art? Or is it a religion? It seems to me that the more that you study, you find the collusion or the connection or the collision of all of those things. Technology colliding with art, art colliding with science, science colliding with mysticism, and mysticism colliding with murder. And in that level of murder, in that level of terror, none comes to mind and no name stands out more prevalent within the 20th century lore than Charles Manson. Charles Manson, one of the most famous, if not most infamous men. Murderers, some say. Pawns, others say. Yet part of the collective consciousness, I think we will at the end of this time all say. Who is Charlie Manson for real? Well, all you have to do is go to the website and go to the internet and you'll find very quickly the base, low-hanging fruit of who he was. Charles Miles Manson was an American criminal, supposed cult leader, and musician who led the, quote, Manson family, a cult based in California, in the late 1960s and early 70s. Some cult members committed a series of at least 9 murders at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. In 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of 7 people, including the film actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time. The prosecution contended that while Manson never directly ordered the murders, his ideology constituted an overt act of conspiracy. Fascinating statement right there. Before the murders, Manson had spent more than half of his life in correctional institutions. While gathering his cult following, he was a singer-songwriter on the fringe of the Los Angeles music industry, chiefly through a chance association with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, who introduced Manson to record producer Terry Melcher. In 1968, the Beach Boys recorded one of Manson's songs, Cease to Exist, and renamed it Never Learn Not to Love. But Manson was uncredited. Afterwards, he attempted to secure a record contract through Melcher, but was unsuccessful. Manson would often talk about the Beatles, including their famous 1968 album. According to Los Angeles County District Attorney Vincent Buglisi, Manson felt guided by his interpretation of the Beatles' lyrics and adopted the term helter-skelter to describe an impending apocalyptic race war. During his trial, the attorney argued that Manson had intended to start a race war, although Manson and others disputed this. Contemporary interviews and trial witness testimonies insisted that the Tate, LaBianca murders were copycat crimes, intended to exonerate Manson's friend. Manson himself denied having ordered any murders, and in fact, he denied that unto the end. Nevertheless, he served his time in prison and died from complications from colon cancer in 2017. That is the low-hanging fruit. And yet, in Sinister Forces, the author Lavenda begins to connect some of these connections, these dots, and he asks some interesting questions. Was Charles Manson who we believe he was? Was he simply this weird fringe cult leader out of the hippie movement that moved upon the innocent minds, the torqued minds, the drug-induced minds of teenagers and young adults and caused them to kill so that he could be the messianic leader of a race war? Is that who he was? Because when you listen to this egomaniac that we've been told, when you listen to him describe himself, he does not describe himself in messianic terms. He describes himself as a petty thief.
You've got it stuck in your brain that I murdered somebody.
What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here.
Burglarized a grocery store, stole some nickels and dimes, busted open a stamp machine, stole a few automobiles, and cashed a couple checks. I'm a petty car thief. I've been with prostitutes and bums and winos and all my life. The street is my world. I don't pretend to go uptown and be anything fancy. I can, but I find more real in the world that I'm in than I do the tinsel. And the real world is the one I have to deal with every day, you know. Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
So, Lavenda, in his book Sinister Forces, begins to answer some questions that the common story leaves out. He writes, all the records say that Charles Manson was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. It makes sense that his mother, Kathleen Maddox, would have traveled that far upriver from Ashland, Kentucky, to have the baby, since it was born out of wedlock on November 12, 1934, to a 16-year-old girl. The father is believed to have been one Colonel Scott, about whom not much else is known. It is believed that Colonel Scott died in 1954, although even this has not been officially confirmed. Colonel Scott's brother, Darwin Orwell Scott, was only 27 at the time Charles Manson was born. When he was butchered to death in 1969, he was already 64. If Darwin was the younger brother, then Colonel Scott may have been in his 30s at the time Kathleen got pregnant. The military title Colonel is suggestive but not conclusive. Charlie Manson, wound up being parked with Kathleen's relatives in small towns all up and down the Ohio River, in Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia, while Kathleen had her various adventures. One of these involved robbing a gas station with her brother, Luke, in 1939. The sibling desperados used soda bottles as their weapons of choice, knocking out the station attendant with them and robbing the till. Kathleen and Luke were apprehended, and Kathleen was sentenced to 5 years in the state prison at Moundsville, West Virginia, in the heart of a burial mound territory. During that time, Charlie was sent to live first with a religious grandmother and then with an aunt and uncle in McMewen, a town a few miles outside of Moundsville, where the Grave Creek Mound is located and where the infamous Phoenician tablet was discovered. Charlie was only 5 years old at the time. The records are a little bit spotty from there on, but what is known for sure is that Kathleen was paroled in 1942. She took charge of her 8-year-old son and led another series of adventures with drunken, quote, uncles in 3 states. In 1947, the court sent Charles Manson to a home for boys in Terre Haute, Indiana, where he remained for 10 months before escaping and returning to his mother at the age of 13. Kathleen, by this time, had decided she had seen enough of her son, so he ran away again and began a life of crime, breaking into stores, stealing whatever he could find, until finally the courts got a hold of him again and sent him, of all places, to Father Flanagan's Boys Town. The infamous Father Flanagan's Boys Town. The 1938 film Boys Town starred Spencer Tracy as Father Flanagan and Mickey Rooney as one of his tougher challenges. Somehow it is difficult to picture Mickey Rooney playing Charles Manson, aside from the fact that both gentlemen are somewhat on the short side. Flanagan's experiment was considered a kind of boot camp for juvenile delinquents, but Charles Manson didn't last a week there, Lavender writes. He and a friend broke out, stole a car, and made their way to Peoria, robbing a store and a casino along the way. Now let's pause here for just a moment and remember that who we're told Charles Manson is a megalomaniac, a man who was a leader, a powerful, a hypnotizer, a manipulator, who fancied himself as a messianic prophet and a messianic leader, instigating or trying to instigate a global race war because he believed he was receiving communications from the Beatles through Helter Skelter. Petty car thief, petty criminal, illiterate, messianic megalomaniac leader. Something doesn't jive. Lavender goes on to write, he was apprehended after a string of crimes in 1951 and sent to another, quote, school for boys, this one in Washington, D.C., the National Training School for Boys, a secure institution which was run more like a prison and which was indeed under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Prisons. Now, it's very important to understand 1951. During this time, one of the things that has happened is that the prison system was now a farm. And we're going to come to this in a little bit. But it was a farm for the CIA, the early intelligence agencies, to begin running operations on how to manipulate the minds of people, how to manipulate agents and to prep them to keep from being hypnotically attacked, to keep them and have them prepped hypnotically from being brainwashed, or the ability to be able to brainwash. But they had to run tests, and where do you get your test subjects? Well, you get them from the offscouring and the garbage of the world, and that would be the prison institution. This is where Charles Manson ended up. Petty criminal, petty thief in Washington, D.C., right under the nose of what possibly could have been an ongoing operation. Lavender writes, that was in March. By October, he had managed to convince the school's psychiatrist that he was trustworthy enough to be transferred to a minimum security home, the National Bridge Camp. But from there, things only got worse. While his aunt had visited the camp and told the board that she was willing and able to provide a home for Charlie, he managed to ruin his chances of an early parole by sodomizing another boy while holding a razor blade at the edge of the victim's throat. Something happened now. He's becoming more and more violent. He was transferred to the Federal Reformatory at Petersburg, Virginia. While there, he was deemed very dangerous and sent to the Federal Reformatory in Ohio. One wonders what subterranean forces were at work that day. Chillicothe is, of course, the center of the American mound culture discussed in the last chapter of Lavenda's book. September 22nd was the autumnal equinox, one of the important astronomical dates around which the ritual mounds were designed. Charles Manson would find himself right smack in the middle of this spiritually charged vortex area. A month after his transfer to Chillicothe, he suddenly becomes a model inmate. He did so well that on January 1st, 1954, he was given a Meritorious Service Award. Then on May 8th of that year, the same year it is believed his father, Colonel Scott, died, he was paroled back to Mamakin, the site of the Grave Creek Mound. Everywhere Charles Manson goes, he is connected in some way, shape, or form with mounds, spiritual sites, or spiritually charged areas. From mound to mound, from place to place, and at this time he was 19 years old. Lavender writes in his book, it is a mystery. What happened to Manson in Chillicothe that he suddenly becomes studious? He was still illiterate when he was transferred there, but there he learned to read and write and do simple arithmetic, mellowed out, and became, quote, a star prisoner. His psychiatric reports were all negative up to that point. Even during the first month at Chillicothe, the doctors were despairing of him, believing that he needed a closed environment and not the relatively open environment of Chillicothe. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Manson becomes a different person and maintained that identity for over a year and a half until his release. That degree of conscious control, especially in a disturbed, uneducated, illiterate, violent criminal, that degree of conscious control, especially in a disturbed, uneducated, illiterate, violent criminal of an alcoholic mother is suspicious, if not alarming. Was Charlie, quote unquote, helped by someone in Chillicothe? According to Manson himself, in his own words, quote, I stopped thinking in 1954. John Gilmore, in his critically acclaimed 1971 biography of Manson and the Family, The Garbage People, retitled Manson, the Unholy Trail of Charlie and the Family, says that Manson met a boy, quote, a boy named Toby at Chillicothe, from whom he learned hypnosis and mental manipulation. Those are his words. Now you have to wonder, read between the lines. Did he meet a boy from which he learned mental manipulation and hypnosis? Or was there a split personality? Were there two now Charles Mansons? Was there one that was Charlie and one that was created Toby? Was there one that was violent and one that could be maintained? Was there one that was a rebellious rule breaker that nobody controlled? And was there one now by the name of Toby who was undergoing mental manipulation and hypnosis because he was a part of a bigger project, a project to learn just how far the human mind in a Manchurian candidate form could be pushed, could be controlled? Remember, we still have sitting out there assassinations. We still have sitting out there Manchurian candidates like Sirhan, Oswald, and others who would change the course of human history. And of course, we have Charlie Manson, who in 1969 to 1971 would almost single-handedly bring to an end, bring to death, the generation of the flower child and the flower power, and forever stigmatize a generation of hippies. What was happening there? Lavinda goes on to write, that may be so, talking about his friend, but the dates in Gilmore's book seem to be wrong. He has Manson at Chillicothe as early as 1951, but according to Bugliosi, he didn't make it to Chillicothe until 1952. Perhaps it's only a typographical error in Gilmore's book, because 1952 is a very likely date for Manson to have met the mysterious Toby, a person that Manson refers to as, quote unquote, definitely satanic.
Toby.
And the only person of whom Manson ever speaks in tones both of fear and awe.
Why you always gotta be so mean to me?
Now what is very, very, very interesting to listen to is that Lavinda in his book, Sinister Forces, if you don't have it, you should, states, during this time, the U.S. government or U.S. government agencies were conducting medical tests among various inmate populations in America. Now let that sink in. The next time they want to put something in your arm, or the next time your favorite president comes along and says, we've got to do this, we've got to trust the science, trust the government, trust whatever, blah, 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 remember that it is an absolute, documented, well-known fact that at this time, government agencies were conducting medical tests among various inmate populations in America. Their most prized subjects were violent criminals, sociopaths, who were just one step away from being broken and remade into split personalities. Sociopaths, possibly like Charles Manson, whom they dosed with massive amounts of drugs to gauge personality changes, emotional response, and other parameters that have never been revealed. While sworn testimony before Congress in the 1970s is evidence that prisons were used for these experiments, listen to that statement again. Sworn testimony before Congress is evidence that prisons were used for these experiments, and often the prisoners themselves were made aware of what was being done to them. The identities of the actual institutions as well as the doctors involved are not known today. Those documents were shredded before testimony could be given. In his book, Lavenda states, we will examine all of this in greater detail in the chapters that follow. But for now, it is well to keep these questions in mind. A. What happened to Charles Manson in Chillicothe, Ohio in 1952? B. Did government experimentation extend from the adult prison population to reformatories for juvenile delinquents? C. Is there any other evidence that children were used as subjects or guinea pigs in medical experiments? And for our conversation today, why is it that we don't know the names of many of these mass serial killers, these mass shooters? Why is it that we don't know the names of what's happening out there? What is really going on in these agencies behind closed doors? Are these monsters of our own making, or are they monsters being made sitting on the couch of the hypnosis?
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context.
So let's pick up our story again with Charles Manson. Let's see what's happening to him and see what we can find and what we can discover. Now again, I want to highly recommend Sinister Forces, Peter Lavenda. I'm only giving you the tip of the iceberg. Fascinating book, fascinating study. Page 205. Charles, Lynette Fromm, and Mary Bruner were living in the woods of Mendocino County when Charlie, hitchhiking one day, was picked up by a Congregationalist minister named Dean Morehouse. The Reverend Morehouse is a strange twist to this already strangely twisted tale, because Morehouse came to California from Minot, North Dakota, I should say. As we will see later, Minot, a small town of about 30,000 people and an Air Force base, was the scene of serious and sometimes violent occult activity that was linked to the Son of Sam murder cases in New York a decade later. Did you get that? So the guy that's going to pick up Charles Manson as a hitchhiker that begins this series of cascading events comes from a place that was highly intertwined with a future serial killer by the name of Son of Sam, who was there. And here now, wait a second, let's not stop there. We've got more Sauls. It is also where Kenneth Arnold, creator of the term flying saucer and involved in the Maury Island affair with Fred Crimson, learned to fly. So again, you see this connectivity, you see these dots here. All of these things seem to miraculously converge. Lavenda writes, Dean Morehouse became converted to the cause, at least insofar as acid was concerned, and introduced Manson, Fromm, and Bruner to his wife and daughter. His daughter, Ruth Ann Morehouse, became the family member known as Quiche, who would become involved in the drugging of prosecution witnesses in Hawaii. At this time, it is not known whether there is any more substance to the Morehouse-Minot link than that. However, investigative journalist Maury Terry would later find elements of a drug and prostitution network shaded with a veneer of ritual Satanism based in Minot, and would connect it to a convicted murderer known as Manson II, to the Son of Sam killings in New York, and to the murder of producer Roy Radin in California. So what would have been the motive of these killings? What exactly caused the Tate LaBianca murders? Well, let's pause for just a moment, take a look at some of the scenes, take a look at some of the sights and sounds, and let's remind ourselves of what history tells us about these two violent, satanic appearing murders. On the night of August 8th, 1969, Tex Watson, took Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Kasabian to Cielo Drive. Watson later claimed that Manson had instructed him to go to the house and totally destroy everyone in it, and to do it, quote, as gruesome as you can. Manson told the women to do as Watson instructed them. The occupants of the house that evening were Tate, age 26, who was 8.5 months pregnant, her friend and former lover Jay Sebring, a noted celebrity hairstylist, Polinsky's friend who was also there, and others. Watson and his 3 women arrived at Cielo Drive just past midnight. Note the time. On August 9th. Watson climbed a telephone pole near the entrance gate and cut the phone line to the house. The group then backed their car to the bottom of the hill that led to the estate before walking up to the house. Thinking that the gate might be electrified or equipped with an alarm, they climbed a brushy embankment to the right of the gate and entered the grounds. Headlights approached the group from within the property, and Watson ordered the women to lie in the bushes. He stepped out and ordered the approaching driver, Parent, to halt. Watson leveled a .22 caliber revolver at Parent, who begged him not to hurt him, claiming that he would not say anything. Watson lunged at Parent with a knife, giving him a defensive slash wound on the palm of his hand that severed tendons and tore the boy's watch off his wrist, then shot him 4 times in the chest and abdomen, killing him in the front seat of his white 1965 AMC. The list goes on of what begins to happen without getting too gruesome and without getting too violent. But they entered the house and did kill everyone in the house, and the pictures and the newsreels tell the story.
In a scene described by one investigator as reminiscent of a weird religious rite, 5 persons, including actress Sharon Tate, were found dead at the home of Miss Tate and her husband, screen director Roman Polanski. Miss Tate, who starred in Valley of the Dolls, was 8 months pregnant and was found in a bikini-type nightgown with a rope around her neck attached to the body of a man.
2 bodies inside, 2 bodies outside.
Among the other victims were Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring and coffee heiress Abigail Folger. Authorities would allow no one in an unofficial capacity inside the posh $200,000 home in the hills overlooking Los Angeles. When police arrived, they found the telephones and electricity lines cut. The bodies had been dead about 12 hours. They were discovered this morning by a maid who ran screaming to neighbors. One officer summed up the murders when he said, "In all my years, I have never seen anything like this before."
While the police admitted they had no suspects in the Bel Air massacre, there were 2 more murders 15 miles away in the Silver Lake section of Los Angeles. Market owner Leo LaBianca and his wife Rosemary were found by their children stabbed and mutilated. The word war was carved into LaBianca's chest, and "Death to Pigs" was smeared in the blood of one of the victims. The word pig had been scrawled in blood on the door of the Bel Air mansion, where actress Sharon Tate and 4 others were slain, but police said, despite the similarities, they do not believe the crimes are linked.
So we come back to our question. Here is a violent scene, an ugly, satanic, bloody, vicious, murderous scene, not once but twice. Why? What you have is a petty criminal, a man who is insane, but he has women around him, he has food, he has drugs, and yet all of a sudden we're told that he is now going to become this messianic leader to create a race war? Lavender writes on page 206, motive was the most ephemeral aspect of the prosecution's case against Manson. Once they had that satanic and racist element, the prosecutors looked no further. They believed that the victims in the Tate and LaBianca killings were selected randomly as part of Helter Skelter, an attempt to force a race war between whites and blacks. Although this dubious motive satisfied the media's lust for sensationalism and served to paint Charlie and his dark angels as the latest incarnation of Satan and Hitler combined, a look at Charlie's criminal history would tell a different story. As prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi himself admits in his book on the case, quote, Helter Skelter, he was surprised by the lack of violent crime in Manson's rap sheet. There were obvious problems with LAPD's investigation of the case as well, which is surprising considering how focused the media was on the sensational crimes. Further attempts to depict Charles Manson as a, quote, serial killer, notably by the late Joel Norris, are also ill-advised. There is no evidence he killed anyone until 1968-69. In fact, he did not personally murder any of the Tate LaBianca victims, although he was convicted for having ordered their deaths. Whatever Charles Manson may be, Lavender writes, and he may be many things, a serial killer he is not, if we look objectively at the available evidence. The murders he did commit himself were not motiveless crimes, but were each for a specific purpose. Even the Tate murders themselves may have been a device to disguise the real agenda behind some of the other killings, such as those of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, who may have been related to gambling debts, and of Gary Hinman, and of the attempted murder of drug dealer Bernard Crowe. While keeping his criminal contacts alive and warm, Charlie was still interested in becoming known as a musician and tried to work the Southern California entertainment network as best he could. He was introduced to Gary Stromberg and Corey Allen, two screenwriters and would-be producers in a small office in Universal City. They were working on a script about the return of Jesus Christ as a black man in America. Interesting. And Charlie impressed them both with his knowledge of black prison slang as well as his insights into religion and spiritual matters. This guy who's been in prison, this guy who's a petty car thief, just a base, low-level violent criminal, he knows and is able to impress these guys? He agreed to work with them one day a week at their office on script ideas and treatments for what they wanted to call Black Jesus. The project never got off the ground, but the die had been cast, and Charlie was now a familiar face in some admittedly bizarre Hollywood circles from 1967 until his arrest for the Tate LaBianca murders in 1969. There were two people in particular who became involved with Charles Manson and the rest of his family. One was the son of actress Doris Day. Terry Melcher, who was living in the house at 150 Cielo Drive, where the Sharon Tate murders would take place. Melcher was interested in producing records, but as it turned out, not in producing Manson's work. A somewhat more enthusiastic promoter of Manson, however, was Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. People with only a passing knowledge of the Manson case usually don't realize that the Beach Boys recorded one of Manson's songs and released it as the B-side of their cover of the old Ersel Hickory 1958 hit, Bluebirds Over the Mountain. Remember that. Bluebirds Over the Mountain. A song about lost love. Manson's song was originally entitled Cease to Exist, a Scientology reference. Where do we get Scientology? L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard connected with Parsons, connected with Aleister Crowley. You see how much this connectivity goes deep and broad?
Without it, I wouldn't be where I am. You know? So it's a beautiful religion, and I'm very proud.
As it stated, it comes from Cease to Exist, a Scientology reference, and not necessarily a homicidal one. But the Beach Boys retitled it, quote, Never Learn Not to Love, which comes from the song's lyrics, and changed the line Cease to Exist to the more seductive Cease to Resist. Isn't that what you would almost tell a person undergoing hypnosis? Cease to resist. This song later made it onto the group's album 2020, 1969. 2020. Somebody has 2020 vision. There are those that see and those that don't. But this time, Lavinda writes, the reference to Charles Manson was deleted. What drew Lavinda's attention to this nugget of information was the song on the A side of Manson's single. The title, Bluebirds Over the Mountain, was suggestive of the CIA mind control operation, even though it had been written by a rockabilly composer from Brighton, New York, one night in the mid-1950s, and seemed too synchronistic to ignore. Remember that phrase, Bluebird. Hickory and Manson were born. The original writer of the Bluebird song, Over the Mountain, was Ersel Hickory. Well, Hickory and Manson were born in the same year, 1934. Both had problems at home. Manson's mother was incarcerated for robbery, while Hickory's mother was hospitalized for a nervous breakdown. Manson probably never knew his father, and Hickory's father died when the boy was only 4 years old. Both Manson and Hickey were farmed out to relatives or foster homes, spent time in reformatories, and ran away from home. Both Manson and Hickey were guitar players and songwriters. Hickey's one and only hit, Bluebird Over the Mountain, then appears on Manson's one and only song recorded by a mainstream label. Is there a reason why Manson's song was on the flip side of the Bluebird cover? The question is, had the CIA's Bluebirds escaped over the mountain? Was Manson a Bluebird, a mind control subject gone amok? Were there other synchronicities to explore? The answer is yes, and the answer is found in Project Bluebird. So, what is Project Bluebird? Well, you can go anywhere. You can simply put it in and go to publicintelligence.net. Publicintelligence.net, CIA Special Research, Project Bluebird, 1952. Dates sound familiar? The following formally classified document from 1952 on the CIA's Project Bluebird, an offshoot of, wait for it, Project MK Ultra, which focused on hypnosis and behavior modification, 2020, Cease to Resist, hypnosis and behavior modification. Here is a petty thief that becomes this messianic leader, and here are these young people that are hypnotized through LSD, drugs, sex, and mental torque, all of it reaching back to Project Bluebird. It focused on hypnosis and behavior modification as a means of preventing agency employees from providing intelligence to adversaries, was obtained from the CIA Freedom of Information Act reading room. In other words, what I'm looking at right here, you can look at, you see on your screen, this is a documented reality that there was a project. One writer says this, Lauren Kuntz writes in February 12, 2022 on coffeeordie.com, Charles Manson and his murderous cult made their mark on American pop culture, even inspiring the 2019 Quentin Tarantino film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Decades after the cult gained notoriety, however, new evidence emerged suggesting that a secret CIA program to research the effects of psychedelic drugs may have contributed to Manson's rise to infamy. In his 2019 book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, author Tom O'Neill asked forensic psychologist Alan Shefflin about the potentially tragic consequences of the CIA's experimental mind control program MK Ultra. Remember, Project Bluebird was an offshoot of MK Ultra. Was it possible, O'Neill asked, that the Manson murders were part of the MK Ultra experiment gone wrong? Shefflin responds, no. It is the result of an MK Ultra experiment gone right. Its home on an old movie set at the outskirts of Los Angeles became a haven for runaways, drug addicts, and misfits. Several of women were minors. Manson family shocked America in 1969 when some of its members carried out 9 gruesome murders in Los Angeles. Among the victims was American actress and model Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant. The staggering brutality of the so-called crime of the century captured America's attention. The fact of the matter is, something was going on. The modus operandi in these murders was especially sadistic. The killers smeared political messages in their victims' blood, including the words helter skelter. Of course, you know the following that Manson was arrested. Apparently, by 1967, Manson, then 32 years old, had spent half his life in prison from a myriad of crimes. Following his parole that year from California's Terminal Island prison, Manson ultimately made his way to North San Francisco. While in the Bay Area, Manson's inglorious life path took a turn for the truly bizarre, intersecting with 4 different CIA-funded drug research studies. His participation in two has been confirmed. Here are some of the interesting things. Manson's parole officer, a Berkeley doctoral student named Roger Smith, was part of a federally funded program researching LSD and drug use among San Francisco's population. His position as a parole officer allowed Smith to provide an element of immunity to his unwitting research subjects. Although he had the power to send Manson back to prison for violating the terms of his parole, Smith never reported the cult leader's numerous infractions. Thus, Manson remained free and hooked on drugs. Why? Project Bluebird. Roger Smith's tenure at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic allowed him to collaborate with David Smith, a medical doctor with pharmacology experience and the founder of the clinic. In exchange for federal funding, courtesy of the CIA Black Ops, the pair researched recreational drug use among their patients. Soon enough, the clinic's doctors and clinicians began to recognize the frequent presence of young runaways and addicts who belonged to Manson's quote-unquote cult. Another of the clinic's researchers, Louis, Jolly, nicknamed Jolly West, ran a clandestine study about LSD and drug use among hippies. A CIA psychologist with a background in deprogramming victims of brainwashing, West refitted a dilapidated Victorian home, which you can see still standing today, near the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic as a, quote, fake hippie crash pad, a ploy to study drug addiction and homelessness. West worked for CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb, head of the MK Ultra program. On Gottlieb's watch, this sordid CIA operation administered LSD to unwitting subjects, attempted to synthesize the ultimate truth serum, and pursued all kinds of mental, psychological, and torturous research in creating the perfect assassin and implanting false memories. After working for Gottlieb at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas and the University of Oklahoma, West moved to San Francisco, where he met Roger Smith, David Smith, discovered their work, and they all worked together. Now, you tell me, who is Charles Manson? Who was Charles Manson? Was he a criminal? Was he somebody that just came across and figured out all of a sudden, I'm going to use these guys to create a race war murder? Or is there enough of these spokes from the CIA, MK Ultra, all of these psychologists, Project Bluebird, that as the one man said, he was not an MK Ultra gone wrong, he was an MK Ultra gone right. Oh, and by the way, let's give one more connection if we can. One of the more unusual family members, not often remembered, though if only for a short time, was Dee Dee Lansbury, the troubled teenage daughter of actress Angela Lansbury. Well, what is so special about Angela Lansbury? You said, she was the one when she got older that played Murder, She Wrote. Yes, but there's something else about Angela Lansbury that's a little bit fascinating. Angela Lansbury went so far as to give Dee Dee, her daughter, a note that said it was all right for her to stay with the Manson family in case she got hassled by police. Talk about Mother of the Year award. Well, the author felt the interest here about this. Why? Why would it be so odd? What is the connectivity of Angela Lansbury, MK Ultra, Project Bluebird? Let's not forget who Angela Lansbury is. Angela Lansbury played one of the leading roles in the movie in 1962, The Manchurian Candidate, starring Frank Sinatra and others. In fact, Angela Lansbury was the main evil character plotting the assassination of the president. Her daughter connected with Charles Manson, all of it intertwined. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Do you remember the initial question that we asked that was written in the introduction by Lavinda? Let me read it to you again and see now if you catch it. Perhaps, he writes, with reference to what seems to be a Fortean element, the pattern of coincidence that enfolds these highly strange events, adding a distinct woohoo factor to the Lavinda's study. Now watch very closely. Whether it's Lee Harvey Oswald's habit of hanging out at a cafe in Japan, He was noted for hanging out at a cafe in Japan. Got in a fight in the cafe at Japan. This cafe would play a pivotal role in his move. Well, what was the name of the cafe in Japan where Lee Harvey Oswald frequented? The name of the cafe? Bluebird. Bluebird was the name of the cafe that another Manchurian candidate, another weak, spineless, petty sort of a guy, all of a sudden takes it upon himself to bring an entire country to its knees by one act. Manson, Oswald, Las Vegas, Parkland, what do they all have in common? Are they all simply rogue elements, radical free elements within this body of this country's system that goes off, maybe, possibly? Are they MK Ultra gone wrong? Or are they MK Ultra gone right? The sinister case of Manson, the sinister case of Oswald, the dark nexus that seems to connect it all. Find it and more in the book Sinister Forces. And you don't even have to get the book. Just turn on the news and let's hope that this current president can survive whatever Manchurian candidates are being formed now for our future.
Were you happy when you found out you weren't going to go to the gas chamber, Charles?
Well, I knew I wasn't going to go to the gas chamber because I hadn't done anything wrong.
You scared to die?
Sometimes I feel I'm scared to live. Living is what scares me. Dying is easy.
You've got it stuck in your brain that I murdered somebody.
What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here.
Burglarized a grocery store, stole some nickels and dimes, busted open a stamp machine, stole a few automobiles, and cashed a couple checks. I'm a petty car thief. I've been with prostitutes and bums and winos and all my life. This street is my world. I don't pretend to go uptown and be anything fancy. I can, but I find more real in the world that I'm in than I do the tinsel. And the real world is the one I have to deal with every day, you know. Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you.
Music is my soul. Music's the way I express. It's my religion. It's my religion.
You also said sex is religion.
Yeah, sex is a reflection. Everything's a reflection of this. When you reflect that, you reflect music. I reflect it in music. That's me. Satan means whatever I'm looking at, whatever I want it to mean. It's on my forehead. It's me if I can get up on that highway. If it's me trying to save my air, my water, my trees, my wildlife. It's me on that cameraman. It's me right there in his watch. It's me in his brain. It's me right there on his ears. And when he shaves in the morning, I'm sitting right up underneath his razor. You dig? It's everything that human beings don't understand. It's all their fears. It's what they're not sure of. You dig what I'm saying? Satan to me would be God. You would be God to me. You dig? I could worship anything as God. Everything is God. The sun is God. The moon is God. Everything is God. Sure, I'm out there on the highway. I'm out there on the highway in Big Dragon, in the underworld. I'm out there in Hawaii. I'm out there in all kinds of different things. You might say I'm kind of like Satan. I'm in so many different places at once. Yeah, it would be like Satan. It would be very sharp for one person to do all the things that I'm going to have to do to survive. In you, and in you, and in you, and in you too.
Cleanse their body by eating peanut butter and